Successfully recruiting key managers, professionals, and executives in the middle market. A little background on who I am. I'm Bob Lindeman. I'm the co-founder of the Overture Group. We're an executive search and recruitment firm focusing on the middle market. We specialize in executives and managers and professionals in those organizations. I have 25 years of experience in strategic planning, management and ownership succession, compensation, and recruitment as a partner in a major accounting and consulting firm. I also currently serve on 2 privately held company boards, and I've also served on 3 other boards over the last 20 years. I believe that's very relevant information as I present today because I'm coming from multiple perspectives as I talk about successful recruiting. Before we jump into the presentation, I'd just like to touch upon a few big picture points. The baby boom generation started hitting 65 years of age about 4 years ago in 2011. Over the next 14, 15 years, you're going to see a significant number of people in all occupations retiring. Unemployment rate for certain categories of worker are well below the national average. Many are in that 2.5% to 4% range, which is a range considered below full employment. So full employment right now, the national average of unemployment is 6.2%. Those categories are IT, selected engineering positions, and accounting, which makes the war on talent even more severe in those respective categories. Talented people are moving jobs more frequently than ever before, but that trend started 20 or 30 years ago when companies started becoming less loyal to employees. But there's a lot of other reasons that have occurred over the last 10 or 20 years that have accelerated that movement. And also, hiring mistakes are very painful and costly to an organization. They're also painful to the candidates that don't work out as well. The topics that we're going to be addressing today are as follows, and there's 6 areas: position description and position specification, recruiting strategy, interviewing and performing due diligence on the candidates, relevant information to be provided for candidates, the offer, and then onboarding and follow-up. The first step is develop a position description and a position specification that will meet the company's future needs, not just today. Key factors and questions that need to be addressed: when was the last time the position description and the position specification was updated, and by whom? Or is this a newly created position? If it's a newly created position, you might have to put a little extra effort in there from the standpoint that newly created positions have a high failure rate. And it's because organizations don't take the time to really evaluate that position description and what it's going to be required to be successful in that role. Also, how much turnover has the company had in this role, if it's an existing role? If it's turned over more than 2 or 3 times in the last 10 years, there could be a problem with that department, with that role. So you need to do a little extra work when you develop that position description and position specification, as well as maybe go beyond that to see the reasons or the causes. Maybe it's that person's boss. Strategic changes planned for the business, demographics of the organization, what stage the company is at in their life cycle. For example, if you're going from that go-go stage, that adolescent stage to prime, where you're really in that growth mode, when you look at candidates, ideally you want candidates who've been there before, that have navigated that type of life cycle before, and so that you can benefit from what they've learned. Also, what's the projected growth or decline in revenues? Obviously, if you're going to grow rapidly, you want to make sure that somebody has been with an organization that's been, if you're going from 50 to 100 million, you don't not necessarily want to hire somebody who's just been with a 50 or 60 million dollar company. You want somebody who's been at that $100 million company before, so that they understand the challenges that will entail. Similar question, but a slightly different question than the life cycle question. Also, what will the organization chart look like 3 to 5 years from now? We encourage clients to draw the organization chart of what they think it might look like 3 to 5 years out by putting the names of the titles of the positions, not the names of the executives, so that you take personalities and people out of it, so that you have a feel for what might that look like in the future. And that will tell you a lot about the organization. Step 2, After you get the position description and position specification nailed down, develop a solid recruiting strategy that's tailored for that position. One size does not fit all. Key factors and questions that need to be addressed: what are the potential sources that we should look for these respective candidates, or for that candidate pool? There's the internet, there's LinkedIn, there's business associations, there's networking groups, there's job boards, there's alumni associations, there's fans, friends, and family. There's all different sources. And so you need to weigh in on those and evaluate those before jumping in and tackling the search. Also, what's the timeline? If you need somebody yesterday and it's a critical position, I would suggest that maybe you look at an interim person so that you have the time to do the search right and let the interim person handle the temporary need or handle the need that's there currently. What are the capabilities and availability of our internal HR resources to tackle this search? These days, especially in manufacturing companies, but also true in a lot of organizations, they are spending a lot of time on the hourly positions and some of the lower level positions, because that's where the turnover is the highest, leaving very little time sometimes to tackle those key contributor, executive, and professional searches. And those are the positions that are really going to make a difference on your bottom line and on your top line. Also, what's the cost benefit regarding the use of an external search firm? They can be costly, but the ROI can be there, especially if they do a good job. And is this a confidential search? If it's a confidential search, you have to watch how you source your candidates. Interviewing and performing due diligence. And yes, interviewing is a form of due diligence and probably one of the most important aspects of due diligence. You want to have the right people interview the candidates, and you as an employer know who the right people are in your organization that will present the company the best, that will also be the best interviewers. What you want to do is you want to provide those people who are interviewing the pertinent information on the position that's being recruited for. They need to see the position description, the position specification, the resume of the candidate that they're interviewing, and any additional background on the candidates. It's very embarrassing, and we do get this feedback occasionally, where the candidate comes back to us, we present them to a client, they go through the interview process, and they get this queasy feeling because they interviewed with one or two executives that were under a different impression what the role was because they didn't have the position description or they didn't have the position specification. So that makes that candidate feel a little queasy about, does this organization really know what they're looking for? Do they communicate with one another? And that situation does occur a lot more frequently than you would imagine. Also, provide interviewers, your internal interviewers, with the training to be effective so they can assess the fit of the candidates with that position and with the organization overall from a cultural point of view. Should leadership management or cultural fit assessments be considered, and at what point in the process? Also, who performs the reference checks? There's no one right answer here. Sometimes an organization will just have their HR department do it. Sometimes the HR department will farm part of it out and they will use an external agency that's all they do. They do an excellent job at that. I've also seen where the hiring manager, for instance, I've seen CEOs actually do the reference checks on VP and C-level positions because they want to get the real scoop, and this position is so mission critical to the organization, they're going to do it themselves, and they feel that they'll get honest answers when they, the CEO, are calling other CEOs. Of course, one thing you need to watch, you need to make sure you get that candidate's permission to contact their references, because there's a time and there's a sequence there. Also, have you gone beyond the references the candidate has provided you? Obviously, most candidates are going to provide, good references, above average references, but you want to go beyond those. And the way you do that is you ask candidates, what about this position, what about that position? Can you give me somebody else in the company so that I get a good cross-section? Or is there anybody external to the organization? If you're interviewing a CFO, can I talk to the accounting firm that you worked with? Who did you work with at that accounting firm? Or the bank, who did you work with at that bank? Of course, you do need to get permission, even though it's not an employer, it is somebody on the external side, and you don't want to get that rumor mill working, so you need to get that approval from the candidate. What about background checks? Criminal, drug tests, education, certifications, financial. As many of you may know, about 2.5 years ago, the state of Illinois changed a law. You can no longer do financial and credit checks on many positions, primarily those positions that involve financials and transactions and cash. You can still do financial background checks, so you really need to dig in as to when you can do that credit check or not. Reviewing candidates' work product or results at other companies. As a recruiter, I like doing this. I like to see candidates' work products, and of course I respect their confidentiality and their intellectual capital, so I will ask them to white out company names or sensitive information, but I would like to get a feel for the quality of their product, the depth of their expertise, what they've done, how collaborative was the process that they used to arrive at that report or study or that analysis. Those reports can tell you a lot about the candidates. At the other end, a very simple way of evaluating other candidates, say for instance salespeople, is ask for their W-2s for the last 5 or 10 years. That will give an indication of what their performance has been, especially if they've been commission-based. Nothing illegal about asking for W-2s. And by the way, if you're going to review this information, you have to return it to the candidates because much of this information is very confidential information. You have to remember in the interviewing process that it is a two-way street, especially your talented candidates, whether they be CEOs, whether they be VPs, whether they be directors or professionals. They're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. So provide them relevant information, especially to the role that they're applying for, and expose them to the right people. What do executives and key hires typically like to see? Well, they're typically not going to see this on the first round of interviews, but on the second round, they should see the vision, mission, major strategies, and core values of the organization. That could also be on the first round. But audited financial statements or high-level financial information or some history of some financial results is very important to a lot of executives. Also, the organization chart. What does it look like? Where do I fall in this organization chart as a candidate? And what does the organization chart look like in the future? Any potential changes? Also, an in-depth tour of the business. There could be multiple locations that this candidate should visit. Another relevant piece of information that candidates may like to see is providing them with any relevant externally developed consulting studies related to that person's role, department, or division. Also, especially if it's a real key contributor or a VP level, or director level, especially in mid-market companies, it's critical that they meet the CEO, or in some cases meet an outside advisor or board member. It helps that candidate get a different perspective on the organization. Likewise, by providing all this information, typically somewhere at the front end of the second round of interviews, now that candidate's armed with a lot of information about the company. Therefore, when they go into subsequent interviews with other executives or managers, they're more intelligent about the questions that they can ask and the insights that they might have as they discuss matters with the other people that they're interviewing with. So there's a lot of benefits. Of course, you may want to get an NDA or a non-disclosure agreement before you start providing confidential information. But don't overlook this step. It's a key factor, especially when you go higher up in an organization to recruit those very, very key people. Making the offer. Understand candidates' total compensation package, the base, the incentive potential, the actual incentive earned, the employee benefit package they have, any long-term incentive packages that they may have. Most don't, but many do, as well as what's the recent history of these 4 or 5 components over the last several years. So you don't want to just get their compensation package as it is today, though that's the most relevant, but what has their history been with respect to their base salary or the actual incentives earned. Likewise, you want to do some market pricing on that position to ensure you are competitive. Market pricing, another term for that, is just benchmarking that position. So again, you're aware of what the market is. You may not be able to match it, but you need to be aware of what the market is. And then don't underestimate the value candidates place on benefits. And health insurance these days, as well as retirement plans, are getting a lot more attention when candidates go to evaluate that total compensation package. Also, with respect to the offer, it does need to be internally equitable as well as externally competitive. And let me give you an example. A lot of organizations have a high variable comp plan. So if you just look at their base salary alone, their base salary may be 10 or 20% below market. On the other hand, because it's a high variable comp plan that's heavily performance-based, It has the upside potential of oftentimes exceeding what the market is paying for that position. So in that respect, yes, from an internal equity point of view, you're fitting this person's offer into your organization's compensation structure and strategy. You're also fitting it into the external marketplace because the total compensation package is above market when you take a look at base and bonus combined. Another thing is employment agreements, or at least the key provisions, must be presented at the time of offer and either be in the offer letter or attached as an exhibit. If you're asking for a non-compete or a non-solicitation, you can't ask them to sign that 2 or 3 weeks later after they're aboard. It's not enforceable. Also, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but consider having someone other than the hiring manager make the initial offer. Take the emotion out of the process. That's not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes it makes sense for that hiring manager because of their relationship with that individual, the trust, what have you, that they make the offer. It's one of those things that you have to look at the facts and circumstances, the relationships. The final step is onboarding and follow-up, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of this step. So you need to develop a well thought out onboarding plan that goes beyond the basic orientation. It should include developing internal relationships, developing external relationships. And when I talk about external relationships, that will vary with the position, but that could include key customers, that could include vendors, that could include your banker, your attorney, your IT consulting firms, other organizations that you have contractual relationships with. Also understanding systems and processes, especially those that you're going to be working with on a daily basis. Don't just get a basic understanding, get a more in-depth understanding by going through training and doing some heavy-duty walkthroughs of those. Also, you want to understand the strategy, structure, and core values of the organization. Now, you got a little of that when the candidate or the executive was being recruited. Hopefully you touched upon that, but now we need to drill down deeper so that that person really understands those aspects of the business. And then you need to establish 30, 60, 90, 180-day goals. The reason there is you want to be able to measure progress. And those goals can be mutually developed between the candidate, who's now aboard, and the organization. I think sometimes they can be mutual in terms of developing those. Obviously, most of those are going to come from the hiring manager or the hiring executive because they need to understand, or they understand what needs to get done. But oftentimes candidates, especially if they're take-charge individuals who've been through this before, will have some really good ideas on what they would like to see in their 30, 60, 90, 180-day goals. And then finally, you have to have a follow-up and a feedback mechanism. Does it have to be super formal? No, but there needs to be a follow-up mechanism. And the higher you go up, you may also want to consider a feedback mechanism where the candidate is giving feedback to a VP or to the CEO, because remember, that candidate has the eyes and ears of an outside consultant during their first 6 months, and the organization can benefit tremendously by their insights. But the primary goal of the follow-up is to give that candidate feedback on the onboarding plan and how they're progressing in the organization, and maybe where there's some gaps in what they're working on right now and how they need to get back on track if they are off track. In conclusion, the benefits and return of investment of a solid hiring practice should be significant, both in the short term and the long term. So it's critically important that a middle market company have a well-defined, flexible, adaptable recruiting process. I want to thank you for your time today. If you have any questions, my email address and my phone number are on the next slide. And I usually return my phone calls within 24 to 48 hours and would love to talk to you about any questions or comments on my presentation today. Thank you.